हाय, स्वागत है आपका बहुत इस शो में जिसका नाम है सिटी सेंस। और जैसा आपको मालूम है, सिटी सेंस का मतलब है हमारे शहरों के अंदर क्या हो रहा है, कैसे हमारे शहर बन रहे हैं, किस तरह से उसकी बनावट हो रही है, क्या वो टिकाऊ है या रहने लायक भी है कि नहीं है, क्यों वहाँ पर इतनी पोल्यूशन है। सबसे ज़्यादा पोल्यूटेड शहर दुनिया के हमारे पास हैं। हमारी नदियाँ जो मीठी नदी के नाम से जानी जाती थी, आज जो मीठी नदी सिवर के नाले बन गए, क्यों ये सब हो रहा है। इसी विषय पर बात करने के लिए हमारे साथ आज हैं केटी रविंद्रन, और जिन्होंने एक लंबा समय 1982 से लेकर 2012 तक स्कूल ऑफ प्लानिंग आर्किटेक्चर में पढ़ाया है। रॉयल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ चार्टर्ड सर्वेज के वो एक तरह से फाउंडर रहे हैं, और हज़ारों नहीं तो सैकड़ों लोगों को ट्रेन करके इस देश के अंदर तैयार किया है जो शहर बनाए। ये शहर जो आज हमारे हैं, क्या ये शहर, और जो हम इनसे पूछना चाहेंगे कि व्हाई इज़ इट दैट द सिटीज़ दैट वी आर लिविंग, दिस होल प्रोसेस, where have we learned this whole process of city planning? Because we have this conventional wisdom that comes from Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. It's not that we never knew about city building. So we had drains at that time. Then why is it that today when we speak about our rivers in the cities, they are sewers? So what is the connect between health? Was health fundamental in building up the whole process of planning? What happened in 1947? Colonial period had one particular model of city building, but 47 we should have inversed that. Were we able to inverse it? There were certain landmarks. For example, the whole question of planning institutions developed. Where was the fault, despite the fact that we had the School of Planning Architecture coming up, the 5-year plan speaking about all this, and then why is it that the cities have become completely exclusive? I mean, where are the poor living in the cities? What about the question of health? And I think what Katie will answer is something, this whole question, what he has been in a very funny anecdote pointing out, the thing that the planners love the most, the butter paper. So why is it that they love the butter paper, bring in a circle, ring road, then there's an outer ring road, then another outer ring road. What is the role of land? Can land only be monetized, or land could be for the people? And also the whole question of how climate change, it's not climate change, in fact the severity of climate change impacting our cities. Is there a way of coming out of it? Is there a way where we can speak about in resilient terms? Let's discuss all this with Katie. Welcome, Katie, to this show. Yeah, and Katie, you were also responsible for the establishing of the RICS, that's the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors in the country.
Not responsible for establishing it, but I was the first employee in India.
So you were the dean of that.
Yeah.
So you produced, hundreds and hundreds of designers, urban designers in the country.
Yeah,
and right. Today, as we know, so what we are going to discuss with you is, this whole process of the unbundling of urbanization in India. We started from somewhere around 25% urban when we got independence, and today perhaps we don't have the exact data. Some say we are almost 35% urban, but 2011 we are at 33%, which means around 500 million people are living in the cities. So how do you see this entire process, Katie? Because from your experience of teaching, but from your practical experience of how we've built the cities, some say it's a typical Western copy-paste model of building our cities. We'll have industrialization, and then finally industrialization is going to lead for this large shift of people migrating from the countryside to the cities. That didn't happen. That doesn't happen. So there's a kind of continuum also. So I would like you to dwell on all these aspects and the whole process of sustainability. What is happening to our cities? Maybe later we'll come to that. The question of inequity, the question of the whole question of assets, access to assets, and this huge gap that has creeped in. But first, how do you exactly view this whole process, since you've seen this process unbundling in the country?
First of all, it is post-independence that we attempt any kind of modern planning. And when one can find 100 things wrong with it, one has to say that if there was no planning in India, we would have been living in very wild jungle-like conditions, urban jungles. So where there would have been no rule of law, no regulations, no systems, nothing. So it has contributed enormously in containing many of the malefacts of what you can call progress or growth, industrialized growth. So that being said, one also needs to look at how it's been a fundamentally erred path, where there's been basic mistakes made right from the beginning to the end. If you look at the history of planning itself.
So I mean, if you could just point out to those mistakes. Yeah.
If you look at the history of planning itself, it comes as primarily as a response to, I'm talking about history of contemporary planning. It comes as a response to the plague in the 1850s, where they discovered that unplanned, overcrowded settlements are actually the bed in which the plague is bred. And that certain amount of planning and regulations are required for those settlements to regain health. So it is primarily seen as a health issue. And from the history of planning says that the intelligentsia of Europe got together like clubs in different locations and started discussing the conditions that people are living in, because it had come to a very pathetic pass because of over-industrialization and a complete absence of planning. So the result was that we started inventing all the current toilet features that we have.
The tools,
all the wash basins, the WCs, the piping systems, water supply through piped water, sewage disposals. All these were conceived at that time in response to the health conditions in the settlements. And those became the basic bedrock of planning. But in hindsight, now after 150 years, you can say that there was one fundamental flaw, was that those days, it is famously said that the solution to pollution is dilution.
Okay, that's interesting. Solution to pollution is dilution.
Dilution.
So dilution of the masses, that means.
No, dilution.
The density.
Dilution by water.
Okay, by water. Okay.
So you dilute, you have half a liter of pee, and you dilute it with 15 liters of water.
Okay.
And you flush it out.
That's you consume.
And don't worry about where it's going.
Okay.
So there begins the fundamental problem of excessive consumption of water and the absence of caring for where the sewage is going. So they all went to the rivers.
To the river ecosystem.
To the nalas and the rivers. And you can see now every city suffers from polluted river systems. So the origin is in that. But the sad fact is that we still have not improved upon that system.
Why, Katie? Why have we not improved on that system? I also want you to address this post-47 period.
Yes, it's a very interesting question why it has not happened. For instance, the control of development then was taken over by the health department. Even in India, in 1936, there was something called the National Health Survey. NHS. That was done by the British, organized by the British. And it's that survey that recommended that there should be regulated municipalities and there should be planning and so on. So they slowly start bringing in a certain systemic regulation of cities and their growth. So it's from that the current planning has inherited its antecedents. So the problem, the question that you asked is whether we should, why is it that it's continuing to be in that manner? So, there are many such continuities in our system. And because over a period of time, those systems develop their own vested interests within the system, and they tend to perpetuate themselves within the system. So even now, if you look at the composition of our planning bodies, you will see traces of what was practiced in the colonial period. This is not to blame those people who did the initial planning. They did what was best at that time for them. But the problem is that we have refused to review that. So in the 1960s, when first master plan was brought into Delhi, it was building upon the systems which are kept in place post 1936 survey. So they brought in what is called city improvement trusts, and I don't know, those who are familiar with Delhi will know places like Ashok Nagar, which are kind of industrial centers, were planned. They were planned centers, planned neighborhoods with regular gridiron roads and houses and disposition of parks and open spaces and shops and so on.
Just like you had Chandigarh, I mean, Kabuzier planning Chandigarh building,
Similar, but these are the first, kind of early 1900 solutions to the viewing of those problems. So from that, there was the inheritance of the Delhi master plan. So when post-independence, there was a very famous meeting that took place in the Lalit Kala Academy, which was chaired by Pandit Nehru, and the main idea was to look at how to develop a modern day planning system for Delhi. And primarily housing was looked at as a major issue.
Yeah, because you had large number of migrants coming from West Pakistan.
Absolutely, So in 1959 that meeting took place, and in that Nehru laid out his vision for the role of the master plan to regulate the economy and regulate land and its distribution. The idea of setting up the School of Planning and Architecture came up from that meeting. Delhi Master Plan was already there in 1956. 1956, the work had already started. And subsequently, when DDA was set up, its primary objective was to look at housing for the poor.
So that's why you had the LIGs,
that's right. All the categorizations. There was a big exhibition that took place in Pragati Maidan in 1954 of housing organized by Nehru. So there was a whole series of looking at housing for the poor. Yet, if you look at what we have done today, we can see that three fundamental areas are neglected. First is that the urban poor itself has been neglected from the planning process.
That's the current master plan you're talking about.
All master plans across the country. Planning as a system in India has ignored the urban poor, made very feeble attempts to do housing for them. I can't say they entirely ignored, but they largely ignored. They've ignored nature, which was fundamentally at stake from the first idea of dilution of pollution. So nature was upfront contradicted with urban development. And the third thing that was ignored was heritage. So all
heritage,
three,
nature, and housing.
All that is not necessarily just housing. When I say housing, when I talk about urban poor, it's not about housing. It's about housing and livelihood. Because without livelihood, there's no point in doing
Katie, housing. I remember looking at the first master plan of DDA and of course the recent one as well. So I remember because most of the people at that time were illiterate. So there was some person with the beating of the dhol would go to the locality.
That's right.
And of course you had master plan translated to English. English to Hindi, to Punjabi and Urdu. So you had 4 languages. And those who couldn't read, there was a munadi. So this kind of transformation that we're witnessing now, not to make it irrelevant, the point that what you have already said about Janta flats, housing question. Now it's all gone. I mean, the whole question of participatory, I mean, even if that was like very limited, but now that entire participatory mode is completely gone. Don't you think so?
Absolutely, it is gone because the locations where this whole concept of planning actually grew And the model that we adopted was an American model. Yeah. And in the American model, they have this thing called advocacy planning, where there's a neighborhood level participatory process through which planning decisions are made. We have done away with that.
So what is the current model of planning?
In the current model, there is a whole chapter on participation. And the model is that once the master plan is brought out, it's brought out in the form of a draft plan. And that draft plan is published in various locations and publicized by the Delhi Development Authority or any other authorities for public response to the plan. But the plan itself is an obscure document for the public because they cannot read the plan. First of all, difficulty in understanding jargon and language that is used in planning. Secondly, many people are not drawing literate. They cannot read drawings. And they cannot understand whether their house is shown as a garden or a road or as a house. They can't understand it. And whatever comes in that plan, after the draft response is received, is firmed into the master plan. You know? And as the master plan is approved, it is of course a process through which they collate all the objections which come from the public during the draft stage. And those objections are considered by a board. And after they consider the objection, they, of course, obviously, they cannot accept every suggestion. Suppose you have 70,000 suggestions, they cannot use 70,000 suggestions to modify the plan. But that board will have a considered decision on the objections and suggestions. Then they will develop the final plan, and that plan is then sent out for it's gazetted. It's approved by the Ministry of Urban Development. Then it is gazetted. Once it is there for 20 years, written in stone. You know?
But Kiri, I remember I mean, we know that process, but and we also know that most of the master plans have failed. I mean, you decide something and then, all of a sudden you find no. You decide for a population of, say, 200,000 and you find more than...
Population is already overshot.
So the master plan goes into shatters, and we've seen this proliferation of slums also, poor, making their own master plans, occupying some spaces. But I remember you telling us in very informal chats that the planners love butter paper the most. So they draw a circle, that's how they plan, that's the ring road. And then when it's overgrown, then again they draw another circle, another ring road and an outer ring road.
It's a compulsive activity.
So how do you look at it? I mean,
I think it's done.
I think it's more to do with land and this whole transformation that we're witnessing.
Absolutely. You're very right on that point. It's a very important point. I think every city in India now, the first thing that the planner does is to see if he can bypass the problem, not confront it and solve it. So
that's an interesting point. Actually,
that literally becomes solidifies as a bypass road. In which the vehicles are taken outside the city so that you keep unnecessary vehicles out. It's not a bad idea. You need to keep the unnecessary vehicles out. But the other related issues that connected with that are even more important. First of all, it becomes a way of adding value to the land through which that road is passing. Once you have the infrastructure in place, the land value shoots up 10 times. Then you immediately have a flurry of activities from the investment circles to come and invest in that area, and therefore that becomes a part of the town in no time. And then very soon you kind of overtake the function of that bypass, and then you're looking for another bypass. Then you create the third bypass. Now, unfortunately, the whole concept, bypass itself is not a bad idea, but when you plan it in such a way that it creates continuous concentric circles around the city, that becomes like a noose on the land because it prevents the outflow of water.
And that's how you find urban flooding.
That's why you find aggravated flooding condition. Aggravated flooding condition. City after city, if you look at, you can see either the railroad systems or the road network are the primary causes for retention of water in land. Because the land is not allowed to run away from. So You can take Calcutta, you can take Bangalore, you can take Delhi. Delhi is a graphic example. Recent floods that we have had in Delhi, one of the primary reasons is that first the British built the railways going across on a bunt on the riverbed. It was built on the riverbed. Then you have the ring road coming up. Now you have more and more 3 ring roads around Delhi.
And most of even the housing projects are paddy fields where you were constructing those.
Absolutely, low-lying areas, building in low-lying areas. I mean, it's a very unfortunate thing that land, which is a primary resource in planning, primary resource in any development, has not been given any attention in planning. Land is only seen as a commodity that you can transact. So this comes from a mindset where everything is commodified and is transactable.
So how do you alter this process, Katie? Because, I mean, we can understand there are many players in it. And so the last 2 points that I want you to dwell upon. One is, how do you alter this process? Because if land is so important, so are the people. And what is the intricate relationship between land and people? The whole question of participatory, can there be some alternative models and more engaging with the system? And lastly, also, Katie, what you have said is, I mean, at several occasions, is about the whole question of, large capital guiding building typologies. I remember you saying, how the entire planning process has been corrupted. So instead of a playground, you will have a stadium. And instead of a primary health center, you will have a multi-speciality hospital like you have in Gurgaon. Who don't have
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I want you to just dwell on this, this whole process. And what are the ways in which, people or the collectives can really contribute in maybe tweaking or little altering, if at all that is possible, against the juggernaut of, that large capital intensive technology.
You see, there are 2 things which are simultaneously at work in, you can say, in the Indian city. Primarily, there is the juggernaut that you mentioned of investment that is pouring in from inside India itself as well as from outside. The second thing is the upsurge of the people. So these 2 are kind of totally opposed to each other in terms of their aspirations about how they want to use the city. So the big city, the big money and the big investment that is coming in is looking at city as a resource for more development to get faster returns. Whereas the people are looking, they want to walk freely, they want to don't want to get polluted, they want a quality of environment, they want lived experience to be improved. Now, unfortunately, in India, the planning system has not looked at that lived experience. We have, since 1969, we have the discipline of urban design in India, being taught in India. In SPA it began. It still continues. It's one of the most popular departments in SPA even now. And there are hundreds of urban designers now across the country. And urban design primarily looks at improving the quality of life of people. So it's about the lived experience of the city rather than about giving abstractions about where financial flows can take place. So this has been largely ignored in our development plans, is to look at how to improve people's lives on ground. What do they experience in the city? That's actually been ignored. Now, on top of it, looming large now is also the issue of climate change. I mean, it's no more called climate change. It's called climate crisis, not climate change anymore, because it has come to a crisis kind of point, where you can see increased amount of rain and floods. There are natural forces that have been let loose, which we have no control over. So what cities can best do is to build resilience of both the city infrastructure as well as of its people. So I feel that the current planning should now move towards building resilience rather than building in growth.
So if I am asked last word, I mean, what should be the tools, I mean, to build those resiliences? Just capacity building, or, because we hear a lot, but still if you ask a city leader, they would say, no, we want more investments. We want the metros to come in. We want, the highways to really widen, 4 lanes and that happening. So what are the tools, I mean, to really tweak?
So actually the solution also lies in the way you analyze the problem.
Yeah.
Firstly, we recognize the 2 fundamental areas where we need bolstering of through the planning system. One is in the urban system. Second is in the people, to build resilience in the people for them to be able to deal with what happens to them. Now, currently there is no resilience. Now, yesterday's news says that some 1,100,000 people have been dislocated in floods. It's a humongous number of people. It's humanity. So there is no resilience in them to be able to either deal with the calamity nor to deal with the aftermath of the calamity.
True.
This is particularly acute when it comes to the urban poor. Urban poor is impacted in multiple ways because they not only lose their house, they also lose their place of work because they work in public places. They sell things, they make things in public places, they sell things from their house. So there is a loss of both livelihood and housing. That's a very acute problem. Now, the planning has to confront this upfront and start moving towards solutions. We cannot take shelter behind, like big master plans for 20 years and ring roads after ring roads. It's a ridiculous thing to continue doing that because you can see the suffering in front of your eyes, that people are homeless, people are without work, they have no income, they are under great health threat and they don't have the financial resilience to deal with the health threat. There are very acute issues generated by the urban form. And now, in my view, town planning must confront this as the primary objective of building resilience within the city infrastructure as well as within the people of the city. So both these have to be tackled together and they have to be done in tandem with each other. Because one of the fundamental problems the reasons why planning has moved away from people and it's not anymore understanding what the people need, it's not touching their lived experience, but it's creating some abstract requirements for investment rather than looking at how people are living in their cities. One of the fundamental reasons is the disconnect between people and the city. Now, this disconnect has to be brought together. It has to be repaired through planning. That should be one of the fundamental problems of planning.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I think that's the takeaway. I mean, the disconnect that is there between the city and the people. And, this whole process of the planning acting as a tool to repair this. And I think resilience of people and infrastructure. Wonderful. We'll have you again, Katie, for our show because, there are lots and lots that we have to learn.
I have lots of stories.
People, and we want all those anecdotal stories to be recorded. Thank you so much for coming to this show, and
thank you.
We'll expect you to have you more once we are on with the show. Thank you.